Welcome to the Humans and Earth podcast. We bring you inspiration and practical resources for healing our planet and ourselves. It is time for soulful contributions that regenerate life on Earth.
I'm Helen Claire Harmon, a thought leader and teacher who believes we're ready to renew Earth and heal ourselves in the process. Welcome to today's episode. Welcome back to Humans and Earth. I have an exciting conversation for you today with Kalani Souza. He is the founding director of the Olohana Foundation. Olohana focuses on building community capacity, cohesiveness, resilience, and emergency preparedness around food, energy, water, and knowledge systems. Kalani is a gifted storyteller, singer, songwriter, musician, poet, philosopher, priest, political satirist, and peacemaker. A native Hawaiian practitioner and cross-cultural facilitator, he has experience in promoting social justice through conflict resolution. His native roots allow him a unique perspective of the collision of two worlds, one steeped in traditional culture and the other a juggernaut of new morality and changing economic and political persuasion. He is a messenger of integration and collaboration in a world normally rife with exclusion, oppression, and hopelessness. His work in behavior modification research, leadership, team building, and political strategy gives him generous insights into group dynamics and systems of governance. He is a coastal community resilience trainer, a cultural competency consultant to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Pacific Services Center, a consultant to the President's Ocean Policy Task Force, and has taught conflict resolution at the University of Hawaii. Kalani, welcome. I feel privileged to be in conversation with you today.
Thanks. I don't even recognize who that guy was you were talking about. It's, I remember running from the law way back in 1971, I think it was, but that was way back when. And the world, oh my, has changed so much in the last few years.
Yeah, we are living in a rich and complicated time. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was really intrigued when I learned about your work, because what you're doing is bringing together so many areas of expertise and involvement, from Indigenous Hawaiian spirituality and social justice to economic development and conflict resolution and ecological repair. So I think the first thing I'd like to ask you is, in a career or a life that has been really quite diverse and complex in terms of your worldviews and your areas of expertise, what's the center or the grounding that you come back to for your own stability and clarity?
Wow. Yeah, I saw that, I'd love to answer in a way that would intrigue the senses for millennia, but I'm afraid it's a little more mundane than that. The center is where my wife is, where the home fire is, where the community is. It's like whenever I used to travel 220 days out of the year, going to this community, going to that community, helping in this part of the world, that part of the world. A few years ago, I got really sick and bedridden. And what a blessing. I got to stay home. It's like something I hadn't done in decades. And now I think that's the center of it, the community, the children, right? Home with the family and the wife and the relationships that matter. That's That's really it. I was just listening to you now, thinking about the wide range, and like you say, what is the commonality, right? What drifts through it? It's the relationships, right? It's almost as if you could sum it up in there's a doctrine of discovery, and then there's a doctrine of relationship, which is something that is true of all of those tiny facets of our life, right? Whether it's the municipal government or the education system or my backyard and the papaya tree, it's all about the relationships that we're engaged with one to the other. So if I was like taking a broad brush, and just saying, what are the big strokes? Right? If I was looking at this, what is the large framework? Then I can see that separation in the stream at that point where the doctrine of discovery, the papal bulls, are given legal credence, where like the Magna Carta, like this idea of there's ownership and we partition the world between us, and there's relationship.
Yeah, and that people can own other people, or
that
people can own land, or
justified by this identifier or that identifier, right? It's like whatever the identifier would be. I mean, I remember doing conflict resolution and justice, social justice training. Right. And one time I'm in North Carolina, right? I won't name the agency, but I'm over there and I'm walking in, about 220 people, in the training. They've gathered up all the directors and the department managers and then the supervisors of the, and we're all coming to the diversity training, all coming to the equity training. And I walk into the room and I look around. And I say, okay, who in this room has a vagina? And they're all like, what? Right? And lacking the decorum. First, we're down south. We're in the land of Dixie. So I really should be a little bit more diplomatic in the approach, I guess you would say. But I wanted the shock factor, right? So I roll up on the agency, and who has a vagina? Anyone? And slowly, the sisters start raising their hand, right? It's like slow at first, but clearly, yes, clearly. I said, if you want to know about injustice, why don't you just turn and talk to any one of these women? I'm going to give you 15 minutes, right? It's like, let's engage in the, we want to come to a workshop where we talk about injustice, right? And half the people in the room are only being valued at 70% of the other half of the people. But we're all going to have a discussion about justice, right? I said, it's more like just ice, right? They just want you to chill out. They want you to be cool. Right? They're not actually interested in justice. They just want the mediator to get everybody to settle down.
Right.
I'm not interested in settling down.
It's still so tempting for people to want the justice issues to be outside of them. Whereas if you point out that fundamentally, it not only involves race and geography and these various categories, but it involves men and women everywhere in the world.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure you shocked that audience, and I hope that they engaged, because for anybody to be reminded that justice is, or injustice is on us and in us and with us all the time, we still shy away from that.
Yes, not here in the land of the free, right? Not in the home of the brave. And I mean, and that's that trapping. Oh, stop complaining. You have a good life. You know what it's like in India. You know what it's like in China. Actually, I do know what it's like in India and China. It's the same thing. The women over there are oppressed too. Right? It's like, if they're really talking about it the way it really is, what are you talking about?
Yep. And
right?
so's
It's
the earth everywhere we
right,
go.
exactly.
We treat
Exactly.
women badly, and we treat nature badly, and we treat animals badly.
No kidding. No wonder we treat the earth mother badly. Right? It's like they don't look at what is right in front of us, the frameworks that guide the injustice in our lives, right? It's like we could deconstruct them, but oh boy, would that shift the power balance, right? And so what can we do? You said, how do I hold my center? I work right here within arm's reach, right? It's the way all of us should hold our center. Listen, we're like a flock of sparrows, right? It's like we're all, swallows. It's like, shoo. What we should do is stay close to one another, but not bump into one another, and that kind of like social rules, right? And so if that's true, it's like each one of us taking care of our communities, of our families, and extending our hands to our neighbors. Pretty soon we're all connected, right? It's like concepts of the relational doctrine, right? It's like, how do we act locally? How do we think globally and act locally and have it impact the whole, right? How do we extend into what is a quantum realm, but in its physical application, right? How does the one little lone molecule in their village impact the molecule around the globe, right? By doing what they do in their local space, in their place, which is make sure the children are fed, right? Make sure the old people are comfortable. Make sure the women are unafraid, right? It's like really simple rules of engagement right in a small microcosm. I always say, feeding children, man, that requires infrastructure. First of all, you're assuming that there are children, that coupling is going on, right? That the stress is low enough, that family units are happening, that we're not on the run, there isn't a defensive posture, all of that. And then you need resources. So you got to have the materials, the farming, the capacity, you got to have shelter, and if you ever tried to feed a child, right? It's like turn your head for a second and somebody's got a spoon in their ear and you're wiping this up and it's a disaster, right?
Yeah. So you need some peace and quiet in order to feed a child.
Yes, discipline is part of it. Imagination, play, right? Children don't just eat food, right? It's like to sustain a child requires, right? To feed a child requires a lot, right? It's like the least of all, a healthy environment, right? Something that they are growing into, right? And that's so just saying that one thing, are the children fed, right? It's like we're requiring you to answer a lot of questions regarding the dynamic of the village, right? Is the village able to provide these things? Right. And this idea of old people comfortable, not getting by, right? Not settling for, but comfort. That means you have a society that is engaging in practices that recognize diminishing capacity, right? That means it's when there is a moment to have that secondary thought, that means it's an evaluative review on the first part, feeding the child, right? When you have the infrastructure and the capacity to think about how to engage in their comfort because of diminishing capacity, that means you have a society that values wisdom over knowledge, right? It's not the data set. It's about those vessels that carry the data set that you want to integrate with the young children. So it speaks of a high-ranking stature for the intergenerational transfer of knowledge, right? It suggests that somewhere you realize that the connection between the very young and the very old in your society is critical for this exchange of values, this exchange of knowledge, this exchange of place, sense of being, right? That, I'm going to argue, has been deconstructed by the culture of modernity. I mean, and I'm asking for feedback here. I mean, what do you think when you look out and see what we've done since 1975 coming forth?
Well, before 1975, I mean, my original training is as a historian, and as you know too, because you mentioned the doctrine of discovery, this goes back many hundreds of years and also thousands of years. But I absolutely share your concerns. I'm a mom of 3, and I was raised by parents who were really thoughtful about child development and child nurturing and children's contact with nature. And so I look at how we marginalize both small children and the elderly, put them on the edges. I mean, the daycare centers with highways next to them and no green space. I mean, I could go on. So I love what you said, because a concern I have is that I think a lot of people in this information age look around and get very, very overwhelmed, because a lot of people are significantly aware of what you're saying. How often they have the bandwidth to be really conscious of it is relative based on life circumstance and interest. But I think a lot of people are aware that we have some things that are really not going well with the earth, with children, with the elderly, with human health. And I think people get very overwhelmed. So I love the way that you break it down to how are we doing with the well-being of children and the elderly and women. And that, I think, is a set of questions that could guide us forward in a very healing and regenerative way.
Absolutely. All of our technology should be responsive to those humanistic needs. It's interesting. A lot of the old fables, whether it's Atlantis or Mu or, however it's dragged out in the old world, Sodom and Gomorrah, they painted in so many ways stories of technology and civilization overtaking humanity and values, right? Perhaps we're at another one of those moments, right? I am sensing, and it's more of a sensing. And I like to express that I am incorrect 90% of the time, right? And so I'm well aware of that, about that ability. So I'm probably wrong when I say this. He said with a wink and a nudge, right? I sense from the technocrats in the world an ability to economize most of what they see to varying scale. So my suspicion is that humans will be seen more and more as labor resource than will be seen as individual expressions of the universe, of creation. And not just humans, but all. Economy has a tendency to count the board foot, but not the forest, right? So there's this real disconnect. So I'm afraid we all suffer from what the technocrats would call the triple bottom lie, right? Where the N is silent and the social is actually code for labor force, right? And the environmental is actually code for resources. And really, it's all just about the economic stupid, as Hiram Walker Bush would say, right? So there's a real sense in me that divisiveness, that old tale of those who love the earth and those who love the toys is still playing out. Me, I like the toys and the earth. Right, I don't get it. Yeah, I like the puppies, right? I like the little kids. I like the seals and the whales. Right? I don't actually think we got to choose between any of it. I just wonder why it is the story is always expressed that way, right? And why is it always Coke or Pepsi?
Right. Well, we need new stories. We need different stories.
Thank you.
I absolutely agree with you there. And I agree with you. We're on a very thin razor's edge right now where we could go one way or the other. My own sense is I suspect we are going to lean in the direction of regeneration and collaboration and healing, but I wouldn't say how quickly I think that is what is going to come to fruition. It is where I tend to believe we're going. But I hear you that if we look out at the world today, we can make a case for either outcome. One thing that is really interesting to me, though, or feels compelling, is I try to be a voice for making a case for the regenerative and collaborative outcome because not enough people are doing that. And I'm very concerned that although it is valid to tell the story of the possible victory of the technocrats and the economization, the monetization of everything, that is a valid and concerning story. I'm worried that too many people are telling that story. And so the people who want to believe in the possibility of the regenerative collaborative outcome give up. So for me, it's a really, really compelling place right now. Can we invite enough people to believe that the regenerative collaboration has already begun and could strengthen and flourish so that more people join that story? But I definitely agree with you. It remains to be seen.
Yeah, no, I concur. And here's my whole point. Isn't the universe big enough for all of it? I mean, it's at some point, it may not even be a shared future, right? I mean, we're all studying multi-dimensions now. And I think most recently we're looking at a fifth element in physics that we're discovering that. So
the
possibilities.
The muon, is that right?
Yes, nuance and muons, and that they in fact have a generating power and principle all their own. I was on Water Day and talking with some of the folks globally about what if there's an old joke, two hydrogen atoms walk into a bar, right? A hotel room later, there's an oxygen atom and bada bing, life begins, right? So it's like, what if water is the physical manifestation of spirit? So from the dimensions beyond, all things translate into the physical world. And when spiritual power translates, it comes in as water, right? So that's why we look throughout the universe for water as signs of life, when we're looking out from our little ball of water or rock covered with water here, right? So we know that the water is older than the sun. And we know that the water traveled here encased in rock, one drop at a time, right? Slamming into this little body. And then through our natural forces of gravity and compression, the water teases out to the surface of the planet. So the water's older than the sun. It comes from a faraway exploding star, as do we, because we were traveling within the water. So the old stories of the great grandmother coming from the deepness of space, becoming the earth mother and the grandmother moon and the tides and the ocean and the woman that is the sea, are not that far off base, right? And so I start thinking about the relationships that carry those stories, right? Because there are other stories out in the world, as you suggested, stories that talk about regeneration, interconnectedness. What I love about that story as the ice, as the great grandmother, right? And as steam and the clouds in the atmosphere as the grandmother, and as gelatinous, water in fruit, water in our bodies, water in the earth as the earth mother. And then finally the sea, water as the rain cycle and the ocean and the liquid form. So there's water in all four elemental stages, right? Solid, gaseous, gelatinous, and liquid. And it holds life, which tells us that the women pass the mitochondria, that generational adaptation and structuring is in the women's side of the story. It's not the father ice and the father lake and right? It's not the earth father, right? It's the earth mother. And so then we go, oh yes, we look at a cell. Oh, right. There may be a male introductory spark in that single chromosome, but the other three are the mother, and the mitochondria is all the female mitochondria pass through the cells. The inheritance is through the feminine gender, right? Makes you really question these land laws, right? Set up where women are owned by men who own titles to it's like, what? Right? The science doesn't even suggest that. We can look at the biology and see something else. So when we talk about challenging our systems, there's a lot of stories out there. I go with the sisterhood. I go with the interconnectedness of family. I was just on Kauai at a friend's place, and I was sitting in the early morning hours in a pool of water, watching the sun come up above a river that went down to the ocean. Not too high, maybe around 300 feet, but high enough that you could see the landscape fall away before you in the ocean, like in Hawaii, right? Always, Hawaii's got these terrible landscapes, right? So I'm watching the sun come up, and this prayer comes to me. Mind if I share it with you?
I would love it.
So I'm sitting quietly, Hiuvai, returning back to the woman that is the sea, right? Where life began as the coral polyp, as the single cell along the shoreline. So we have a custom of immersing ourselves in the water, returning to the womb of the earth mother and the woman that is the sea and the grandmother moon, and cleansing ourselves, So I come up and this prayer comes right in place with it. Mahalo ke akua. Mahalo awakia. E kani kawai. Mahalo e papahonua. E na wahine o ke kai. Mahalo I kala. E paaina e ola mai. Mahalo mahina. Le kuhi mana I ike mai. Mahalo mahina nui. Mai ka apo I ke au. Mahalo I a kākou. He mana opono he na au. Mahalo he mele nei he hulapa e ho'opono pono. Mahalo ke akua. E kani I kawai. Thank you, creation, and all that stand behind creation. And thank you to the Sky Father and to the Spirit in the water. And thank you to the Earth Mother and to the woman who is the sea. And thank you to the grandfather's son, and for whom we all reside. And thank you to the grandmother moon, who gives us the time and the tide. And thank you to the great grandmother, who out of the darkness of space brings us light. And thank you, everyone, for what you believe is right, and for how you deeply feel. And thank you for the song, and for the dance, and for the time to heal. Thank you, Creator, and the Spirit in the water. And it was just so clear, just like that, right? And it's since ingrained in my mind, right? This is like from about 5-6 days ago. And it just sort of covered everything, right? The relational aspect of all that comes, and I was thinking, wow, we don't need to stand on ceremony, right? We just need to connect again.
Yes.
Like splash a little water on our face, smile at our children, go sit down on the grass with them, or chase a cloud in the sky with our minds, or right, remember those things we did when we were 7, right? Or we were 12, or we were 82.
Yeah, I hear you.
Right.
Thank you for the prayer. And I think it's wise to talk about looking for ways to make those connections.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated what you were saying earlier along the lines of the absolutely fascinating ways in which our scientific discoveries, and you mentioned so many about what we understand scientifically about how water came to this planet, how our scientific discoveries are in so many ways coming together in a kind of synchrony with the old stories, the old wisdom stories about where we came from and what we're doing here. And that's encouraging to me. And I think anybody who's looking in both of those directions needs to just keep talking about it, because we still do have too many people who say, no, I choose the scientific version, or I choose the holistic spiritual version. They are coming together, and it's just up to us, as you did so beautifully. And I actually encourage our listeners, go back and listen again to how Kalani did that. It's just up to us to talk about how the stories are fitting together and what's beautiful and what they say about connection and reverence.
Yes. And if we put the relationships that we hold dear to each other and ourselves, right, first and foremost, then health would be critical, right? So Dr. Wallace J. Nichols, he explored the concepts of the blue mind, of keeping the mind centered on that blue water thought, as opposed to the red flight or fight, or the gray overwhelmed, mindset. And he was saying that the health of the community is directly linked to the health of the water. Right. So when we think about communities like Flint, Michigan, or, so many more across the globe.
Yes.
I mean, think about Africa and the people who don't have fresh drinking water because of the mining, or what's occurred over the centuries. So fresh water, the water cycle, so important to human capacity in communities. The nexus of freshwater energy, food security, which includes medicine and education. That's where communities live, right? If we're taking care of the fresh water, taking care of the energy needs, these are the things we need to feed children, right? If we can't generate food and take care of shelter and all that infrastructure, can't feed children, right? So we're targeting that nexus of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, right? We're targeting what does that look like? So an evaluation, surprisingly, for most institutes and the universities, does not require a $200,000 study and a bunch of public outreach, right? Probably do it for $20, a tank of gas, and a trip downtown, right? It's like take a look around and see what's happening by seeing what are the children eating. Right? If they're eating stuff out of plastic containers in the mini mart, then you know exactly what's going on with the economics of that town. Right? So it's like all these things they seem simple, but they're part of a well thought system of integrating both evaluation, operational capacity, and continuous growth structure within some real simple drivers, right? It's like when I sit down at a meeting, my first thing is, so are the kids fed? Right? And that first question like triggers everything, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
and what
we not?
Yeah, with what are the kids being fed? Because
right, exactly.
We are poisoning ourselves and our children. We're poisoning our future generations with toxic packaged foods that don't count as food. And then I was talking this week to a dear friend who is an educator, and she faces several children in a classroom who are not well. They cannot behave well. They cannot learn well. And I mean, we know what most of these.
And where do we go for that support, right? Where is that social cushion? When we're giving billionaires tax breaks and incentives, right? When the millionaire class is wholesalely moving to Hawaii, right? And going on vacation, while the rest of the country is barely making anything meet, let alone the ends, right? It borders on heinous, right? And I wonder how it is as a society, we're not reacting more forcefully. Oh, that's right. We're all shut down, right? We're all like locked down, put into place, great control mechanism. Right. So I don't want us to miss the historical implications, but I want us to know that humans have survived the first 5 mass extinctions in some form or another, right? So I think we'll survive the 6th one, which we seem to be entering. And I don't want us to feel too badly, but I recently was informed that the total combined body weight of the human race is 8 times all the other living animals. That's a really scary proposition, that you could take all the rest of biological life and weigh it, and humans would weigh 8 times as much. Right? It's that doesn't bode well for a closed loop system, is what I'm suggesting. So since we're going to have adjustments, we should strengthen our communities with food, energy, fresh water, shelter, gather our people in place and create real regional place-based capacity that's micro-sized. So no more Westinghouse large distribution of electricity, no more, 2 airlines serving the whole country. This idea of conglomerations of corporations. Why, that's the English, Dutch, East Indies Trading Company version of it.
Yes, it is. Yes,
I thought we fought a revolutionary war about that.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how did we get back to that?
Right. We're living through another form of colonization. First, it was geographical and racial, and it's still geographical and racial, but now it's economic. And
yes.
I hear you.
I think anybody who thinks it was Right. If they think it was racial, I think they were sorely mistaken. As a historian, you know that if you really look in the rearview mirror, it was always economics, and it was geographical or tribal or national, by political persuasion or regional, allegiance, but never skin color, right? It's like they're willing to throw their own people under the bus.
Oh, indeed.
For the right amount of, quarterly
Right.
dividend.
Right. No, I
So
think
that means
that's true.
humanity is humanity, right? It's like for our children, for the women. Please excuse my wife thinking she has to, duck out of the picture. She's
No
so
problem. No problem.
right. It's like
there's a lot of trouble going on right now.
Yes.
And I think people are becoming more aware. And as I've mentioned, I think we're at a critical point where we're going to be discovering in the next few years and decades, do people choose optimism and a kind of informed optimism and a realistic sort of hope and a commitment to relocalization and regeneration and healing of the human species and healing of the earth and the human nature relationship? Or do we slide into apathy? So I'm curious, what gets you excited and hopeful? If you're looking for the signs that there may be reason to be hopeful and encouraged, what are those for you?
Wow. Thanks for that really good question. Well, I hope you find my answer as intriguing. So years ago, I was amazed, and by years, I'm talking in the 70s. So years ago, I was amazed at the numbers of people who are undergoing spiritual awakenings. I hope you get where I'm going with this. And it was quite a circus, And I enjoyed it personally. I mean, the music was fantastic. The Stones were right there, right on mark. It was going on. And it came to me that we are spirits having a physical awakening, right? So to me, the coffee is sacred. The red wine, the nice conversations by candlelight, these very physical things that are occurring do not happen always in the 14 billion year experience of the universe, right? So I have that perspective that we are spirit, not the other way around. Not that we're a physical being having a spiritual awakening. We're spirit waking up in a physical body going, wow, this is très cool, right? So I believe that the spirit world incorporates exactly what it needs into our human experience as we move forward. I see the glass as half full. Always, right? When it's half empty, you're always thinking, hey, who drank my water? Right? And it's like you can't think about anything else. Hey, no, really, who drank my water? Right? I'm serious. I want to know who drank my water. When the glass is half full, the issue of thirst doesn't even come up. Right? It's like there is no questioning about the water. It's like we're talking about something else. What else is possible? Right? So I'm always in that what else is possible mode. Right? And that's because I believe that spirit will manifest into being exactly the children we need, right? To respond to the earth mother, to the sky father, to the woman that is the sea. I believe that the children who are incorporating now come in with the knowledge of their parents and grandparents living too opulent a lifestyle. I think they're all looking at us and growing up to need less, right? To want more. I don't see that same avarice and hunger I saw in the babies in the 80s and the 90s who wanted more. I want more. I want more, right? They're the millennials now, by the way, who think they're saving the world, running around wanting more, right? So, right, I'm watching all of that, but I'm looking at these 3-year-olds, right, and 4-year-olds, and I'm amazed. And they're so clear, these children, right? They're coming in. They're not petulant. They don't need a lot, right? It's like I'm raising a few of them, watching them, what's being delivered, right? How are we manifesting into the world? Yeah. I believe our world is in resource and population danger, given the lifestyle we're all choosing to live, right? Given the extractive, consumptive, impactful lifestyle. For example, we could create a research center where we look at harvesting organic latex from tropical breadfruit trees and turn the entire plastics industry, particularly the single-use medical plastic industry, into an organic industry where we can reclaim the plastics. And you know what? The petrol companies, they don't see any profit in that. That's why they put those kinds of research institutions out of business, right? So there is a social and economic injustice occurring, and we do need to address that, hopefully without a guillotine, right? If we do this correctly, we engage in dialogue. Oh, uncomfortable dialogue to be sure, but dialogue just the same, right? Not violence, not incapacity, not intrusion into the well-being. For every violent act, for every act of war where one uniformed combatant, one engaged participant is injured, a good 9 women and children are injured.
Yes.
Right? And Amnesty International has these figures. People should understand that war is not only not necessary, it's hugely economically insolvent, except for the few. Right? So it should be unacceptable behavior to humans.
Yes.
Right? And right now, I watched the geopolitical structure in the Pacific being re-equated by both China, the Philippines, and the US, and Japan and Singapore. And there's some tension building, and the Russians are smiling, I think, over all of this tension. The potential for a great and impactful third world war that decimates the Pacific resources would be devastating for the world. So there is no winner when it comes to this kind of positioning. So our forward thinking regarding the optimism of communities, I think the answer to this is regional place-based economic development for women and children directly in community, delivering their own energy, food, education, resources directly in place, right? A reassignment of these global exclusive economic zones and a redistribution of wealth and capacity throughout the world. I've recommended that a few times, right, in UN circles and such. It's not well received by the uber rich. I'll admit to that.
I hear you, and I'm not sure what to say other than we have to keep talking about it, and we have to start instituting it. And yes, that's where I can get really excited about the work of the transition towns movement or
yes,
permaculture, ecological and social permaculture, because through those kinds of approaches, people are starting to do this. And I know a lot of your work is involving actually instituting this relocalization. And what can we do but try it and see what happens and hope. I appreciate your reference to war, because we have to see if we can carry out transformation in this century in a nonviolent way, which would be an unbelievably gigantic forward step for humanity.
Yes.
So can we do it? Well, I hope so.
I think we need to keep an eye on ourselves. It's so interesting. We're 6% of the global population. We use 43% of the resources. We really need to keep an eye on ourselves, our government, right? Our war machine. Make sure we don't get into some kind of conflict to benefit the private sector, the corporate sector. And I worry because we watch, $800 million bailouts, no problem. But, you can't get $2 million for social aid. So I really do worry about our representatives in Washington thinking of themselves as leaders, not as representatives, right? And that's a real shift in their mentality. I still wonder how somebody goes to a $172,000 a year job and walks away with $34 million after a few years serving in Congress. Nothing personal, but I think we should be, re-examining the system, especially as regards our children, as they're watching how we govern. As you know, children learn from what we do, not what we say.
Yeah, I hear you. There are many, many things right now in our world, in our society, and certainly in our own country of the United States that need very close examination and questioning.
But I think even our questioning our own beliefs about how we educate our children, I'm suggesting that many of our young children may have a clearer view on the steps forward, right? And people in our generation should really learn to listen, actively listen, right, to what the future is suggesting it needs, and respond rather than respond to the quarterly dividend. And I'm optimistic, tell you the truth, right? I've never been engaged in more conversations than this last year, where people are actually asking the right questions, right? Seeking to solution build regardless. I got this idea from a friend of mine, Bob Goff, a long time ago. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So everybody ought to pony up to the table, right? Everybody, right? So if we do this not as institutions or organizations and not as powerful individuals, but we do this thing as family, deeply in relationship with each other, understanding that the lives of our grandchildren are dependent on our ability to do the right thing in this moment, right? Having that deep understanding as we move forward could change our trajectory, right? People are inherently beautiful, fragile, afraid, loving, right? It's like fearful, right? It's all these brilliant things, right? That if we can bring them together in the right framework, in the right way, anything is possible, right? So I really hold that belief. I don't want us to scan the horizon, see the potential danger, and freeze in place. Far from it. I believe conflict is the opportunity for positive change, right? Anything else is status quo. Anything else it's static. It doesn't change, right? We need the conflict to change. It just doesn't have to lead to war or violence. It can lead to critical discussions, to a sharing of needs, right? To a sharing of desires for the future. Somebody was asking me, well, how do you see it forward, Kalani? This is just yesterday, right? They were saying, we don't understand how, it's tit for tat. It's sort of a quid pro quo situation. I'm like, no, it isn't. And they said, well, how can you, I'll sum it up in a few short words. The answer must work for everyone. 6 words, right? It's really simple. You want to know what the answer is? It's the one that works for everyone, right? If it doesn't work for somebody, it ain't the answer, right? It's really simple, but we don't want to look at it that way because, that would be too much work, wouldn't it?
I hear people say that. Well, and it comes back to weaving together a lot of the threads we've talked about, switching out of a story of domination and into one of honoring all life and collaboration. Because when that's your standpoint, then looking for a solution that works for everyone starts to make sense.
Yes.
So all the pieces fit together.
Yes, it is a cosmological perspective, right? And my suggestion is, as life forms, when you said sovereignty, we don't focus on those right relationships. And with me at 6 and the initiatory experience, I think they shifted my focus. And the focus is, it's relational. There's 3 families, they tell us: the family you're born to, the family you choose, and the family you were never without. So the family you're born to, whatever karmic lessons you have to learn as a little kid, boy, do they teach you. You know what I mean? Some of them great, some of them challenging, but you learn, right? Then you get out and you get that family you choose. Your daughters, your husband, right? The people in your world, the people that mean something to you, your best friend. You know what I mean? That's the one I choose. That's my sister. I go down in flames at her. You know what I mean? It's right. And they teach you things. But then the family you were never without, right? The grandfather's son and the grandmother moon and the woman that is the sea and the sky father, right? It's as you begin to learn these deeper relationships in the cosmos, you come into focus with 4 relationships, right? The first one is the cosmos. What do I think? Where am I from? How did this all get here, right? And that's so individuated in each one of our feeble little brains. We come up with a new myth, right? And the second one is the environment. What about all this that sustains me, all the other life? Do I have a right to kill that mosquito, right? Does it have a right to feed on me? It's what is my relationship to all of this, right? And then the hardest one, to our society, right? Our schools, those villages, those other scary kids at the playground, Mom, right? It's those, I can't control what's, all of that, the judgment, the avarice, the greed, right? The damage we see, making sense of it all. And then perhaps the most important, the relationship to yourself. Who do I see in the mirror, right? Who do I love? How do I love? How am I with myself, with all others, right? How honest can I be with myself? One day we will all die, right? The Hawaiians call that moment the ha, right? The breath of life. And we call it that because after watching for a couple thousand years, that's what everybody says. It doesn't matter if you're short or tall or skinny or, right? It's everybody says ha. This air comes rushing out of them and that's it. So we say what comes first is called the alo. The book, the cover is called alo. The porch is called alo. What comes first? Aloha. what comes first is the breath, but not the breath of life they think. We're talking about the last one. That ha. If you keep that first in your thinking at all times, you live your life in a righteous way, right? It's like, one day you're going to die. One day you will have that last breath, right? So between then and now, try to be of service to somebody, right? It's like, try to laugh and smile and have yourself a good day, right? Because sooner or later, this is over. Aloha. It also means goodbye, right? It's like, sooner or later, this thing ends, right? But until it does, shouldn't we have a good time? Shouldn't we love and laugh and live it to the fullest? And my father, he says to me, boy, most institutions, the most they can do is threaten to kill you. And you got to die anyway. So that's not much of a threat, right? And when he told me that, I was 14 years old. I just started laughing. I was worried about Vietnam and everything. He was like, come on, stop worrying. You're going to die someday. Stop worrying about it. Live your life to the fullest. That's about the best advice I can give any of us. If we stop worrying about what we're trying to hang on to, but give it away, give it away, give it away, it always comes back to us. I don't know how that works, but somehow that's one of the magic tricks, right? The more we give away, the more it comes back to us. Yes. So everything except your time. Once you give your time away, so your time, we really should teach every 13-year-old girl, be careful who you spend your time with. Mm-hmm. Your time is what you're giving away, right? It's like they should know, right? They shouldn't waste their time pining over someone or something that is not worth it, right? We've all had that remorse of, oh my, did I waste those 3 years? It's like, do not waste them. Tell every 11-year-old girl. It's like we should have initiatory experiences where we share these real truisms with our children instead of sheltering them. The shelter, I think, sometimes leads to the harm. Right? It's, my grandma would always say to my mom, hey, let them eat a little bit of dirt. That's good for them. It builds up I doubt that she was right, but it sounded so good at the time.
Well, actually, but now we know that it's good for the microbiome. So right,
exactly. So it turns out they were right, right?
Yeah.
Eat that leaf, chew on that stick. You know what I mean? It's like, right?
Yes.
Instead, we're all buying yogurt.
Right.
It's like, what happened? What happened?
Right. Well, Kalani, it was such a pleasure to talk with you. You may see the tail wagging here.
I do. I see it.
I've got a furry friend who's telling me it is the time of day when her dinner must be delivered to her.
Yes, ma'am.
And I am so appreciative of your time. It was really a delight to be in conversation with you.
It was a pleasure talking to you. I admire what you're doing. Your questions were so insightful. I mean, I hope you didn't mind me relaxing and just dancing down the unusual answer. I so hate the cookie cutter response.
Yes. No, and that's not what I'm looking for. I mean, you've been in plenty of those settings, I'm sure, those formal settings, and this is designed to be a conversation with creativity and integrity.
Exactly.
So thank you for providing that.
Thank you. And thank you for the hope in the world. Everybody, stay with it. Stay with it. It's so worth it, this life. It is so worth it. Yeah. Love you, sister.
To you Call too. Me. All right.
Aloha.
To you.
Thank you for listening to Humans and Earth. Please share this episode to broaden engagement in the regeneration our world needs. You'll find social media links in the show notes. To explore our other offerings, visit www.humansandearth.com.